Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe here from East Macau Stan.
Hello and greetings.
And today we're discussing the tale of Arwen, or at least the second part of it, and the third part, because it's really a three-part story, but we'll cram part 2 and 3 together. Part 2 sees Aragorn still as the lead
In this kind of story, I say kind of, because it's a short story that serves as a background to his overall arc and story in Lord of the Rings. Advised by his mother Gilliran, Estelle, as he's known at this time, would end up consulting with Elrond, who, contrary to the movies, was neither stern nor harsh with Aragorn.
Takes him aside and talks to him like a father would to his son. In some ways, I had a flashback to and Wilson. This is where the story takes on a very different kind of atmosphere from what one might expect if one is not entirely familiar with the way the bond between Elrond and Aragorn works in the books. And what is more is that the wording used when Aragorn takes his leave of this meeting with Elrond is took leave lovingly of Elrond. So obviously this was not a cold meeting, but a very warm one between a surrogate father and his son. Foresight in the middle of this meeting with Elrond, though, and predicts that Arwen will choose him rather than leaving with Elrond, as Elrond supposed she might. Elrond, this is very bitter for him. Who could blame him? This is his, I think, youngest child and his daughter. Daughters were very precious things once upon a time. Thematically, it's important that Arwen not choose Elrond because, a child must leave the parents' home. This is integral in human society and to literature, because literature recounts the human experience. And nowhere is this better demonstrated than with Lord of the Rings. Many years later, when Aragorn is biologically, he's way younger than this. In actual years, he's 49. He ends up approaching her again, and this time she welcomes him and rejoices at seeing him and is confirmed to be in love with him and agrees to ply her troth to him. I think it is the term in English. That is to say, she's now engaged to Aragorn. Elrond, for his part, is grieved and finds that it's not going to be easier for him to endure this, even though it's years in advance. Ends up interacting with Aragorn. He says, "My son." To Elrond, Aragorn is as good as his son. Now, I'm not trying to turn this into a movie bashing thing, but this is contrary to the movie, where Elrond and Aragorn do not have a good relationship, or at least that's the impression I got. Whereas with the book, no one is more favored by Elrond than Aragorn. And we get, at the end, he says, "Alas, my son, I fear that to Arwen the doom of men may seem hard at the ending." Now, Elrond does give the challenge. You can only marry her when you're king of Gondor and Arnor. After that, you'll have the means to take care of her. But I'm not sure if this will be enough for her. You have the integral problem of her maybe not knowing exactly what being mortal is all about. It is Arwen who would weave the standard, which would become known as the Standard of Arwen, and which Aragorn holds up in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. And so she plays a key role in crowning Aragorn. It is her standard that sees him to victory. So the thing is here, this is an old thematic tradition in literature. That said, Aragorn and Arwen get married, have a great time. They have a great marriage for a number of years. So there's nothing really interesting to tell here. So we'll skip over to the ending. At their parting, though, Arwen tries to suggest, because Aragorn says to her, "Now the time of payment draws near. Basically, it's over now. I'm ready to pass on." Arwen proposes, "No, don't do that." And she's overborne by grief, even though she prophesized this moment would happen. She's still overwhelmed by grief and says, "Would you really abandon your people before they're ready?" This is where she says he's leaving before his time, at which point he answers, "Not before my time. For if I will not go now, then I must soon go perforce. And Eldarion, our son, is a man full ripe for kingship." Aragorn then goes to his son Eldarion, passes on the crown of Gondor and the scepter of Arnor, and gives his blessings to his son. He then lies on his deathbed, tries to comfort Arwen, and tells her, "I can go now." She, however, is horrified, now proclaims that she understands Ar-Pharazôn and why he chose what he chose. Now she says, "As wicked fools I scorned them, but I pity them at last. For if this is indeed, as the Eldar say, the gift of the one to men, it is bitter to receive." And here, whenever kings have tried to not submit gracefully, they typically end up old and enfeebled mentally and physically, as is the case of Tar Atanamir and a lot of of his successors. That said, to proclaim, okay, I kind of get where Ar-Pharazôn was coming from. No, Ar-Pharazôn did what he did out of vanity and greed. Yes, there was a certain fear of mortality, but one has to bear in mind,
when it comes to kings wanting immortality,
think of how many of their subjects they typically crush, destroy, and annihilate on their way there. She speaks from a place of ignorance. Aragorn tells her, well, this is the way it is. Deal, essentially. It's hard not to agree with Aragorn. From another point of view, it's simply grief talking, which, fair enough. And long after, I imagine she'll come to realize that Aragorn was right. This is the way of things, and this is Eru's gift to men. It may feel like a poisoned chalice at times, but it is the reality. What were your thoughts?
I found that Elrond was kind of right. This wedding was probably a bad idea.
I wouldn't go that far. But
More on a matter of Arwen. She was still a little immature on the topic of men. Aragorn dying like that, part of her still didn't understand and comprehend the aging that humans went through.
But we also have to bear in mind, when Arwen forsook her immortality out of love, she should be admired for that and respected for it, because she made a great decision, a wise decision. She did so after having lived for probably a few millennia, and she still, I think, does stand by her decision to a large extent. She began to age like a human does, probably a Númenórean human, that is, so that she's also aged faster since she forsook her immortality at her pretty much around the time of her wedding. Therefore, Arwen is, I would argue, I don't know if I'd use the term she was still immature. I disagree with her grief to an extent. I understand you're coming at it from the point of view of it's when we're grief-stricken or angry that we reveal a part of our true selves. But I do think, though, on the other hand, that while I am harsh with Arwen, and I do think some harshness is mandated, let's bear in mind that people who react this way to their doom and to their sorrow in such a manner, I have seen them behave atrociously towards others. So that, like you look at in other literature, Anakin Skywalker, how did he react? And the possible loss of his wife. He reacted by destroying the Jedi Order. So in that regard, I do understand one would have to be a little harsh with Arwen, just tell her, come on, you're queen, and you knew what you were getting into. On the other hand, I do think some pity is in order for her, because she's just speaking out of grief. Once she comes to her senses, she'll realize what Ar-Pharazôn was doing was evil and wicked to the extreme. The Númenóreans were wicked fools, as she said. So I guess we're just going to have to agree to disagree. But overall, this love story is a really interesting one. I like that this is the motivating factor for Aragorn, the War of the One Ring. And I like that Arwen has her own belief system, her own values, and her own views. Because honestly, the love story would be boring if she shared the exact same views as Aragorn. This is a very complex love story, very well written, in just like 5 pages, I think.
Yes. You see Elrond, very protective of both, and he has to let his children make their own decisions. You've got, yes, I get the grief that Arwen has. She goes through the compromise phase of grief.
Denial. Anger.
And that's important for the character.
And then she finally reaches acceptance.
Exactly. You may not agree with the conclusion she came to.
Well, afterwards, I think she kind of moves away from it.
But yeah, eventually she'll move away from it, and she'll grow wiser from that.
In the closing paragraph, Arwen, she's struck by the beauty of her husband in a way, where her and others look upon Aragorn and think he looks majestic and kingly, and it seems that she, I think, comes to accept what's happened. But she's still grief-stricken, not just for him, but also the losses of her people, and moves to Lorien, where she lives out the rest of her days in retirement, which she's earned it. In that regard, she surrounds herself kind of with her grief, but also with her past and with a retirement, which she has clearly earned. If you had to rate this love story just on its own, how would you rate it?
A good 3.5. It is beautiful. It is a really good read. Not too long. You have a lot that goes on.
Yeah, I think I might say 3.25. I do love it but I like it as part of the Lord of the Rings, not as on its own. But on the other hand, it's really good. Not the best mythological or fantasy love story I've seen. Oh, there's also another thing I do love about it, and I have to say this alone just guarantees this is a 3 at least. and a quarter. The battle standard Aragorn uses at the Pelennor Fields is that woven by Arwen for him, so that in a way she imparts victory to him. But also, this is when he first unfurls the banner and goes down into the fields. Symbolically, this has a lot of connotations, and it's rather like how the Valkyries and Freya would guarantee victory to one side or the other, or even Odin. There's also connotations of Athena here, or Amaterasu, thematically, of Arwen being the thing that guarantees Aragorn his crown, and imparts to him his place in the world in a way, imparts to him kingship. There is so much to say about that, and we'll have to make a separate video at some point. But if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Luthians singing to them.